are we this fine day?
We're good. We're directly back from Donald Trump's own Florida, but with some delightful Floridian queers. So that was lovely. And obviously, Disney has fallen out with the far right. So I got to be gay in Disney World.
Stunning. Really, really thrilled for you on that one, Leigh.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
You deserve that.
Thank you. I accidentally matched with Daisy Duck one of the days, which was quite funny. We were literally kind of wearing the same outfit. Yeah.
I mean, of all the Disney animated animals, I feel that Daisy is probably on your kind of wavelength.
Also, not to be too much of a Disney adult about it, but me and Lizzie, my fully grown girlfriend, met Safari, Minnie and Mickey at Animal Kingdom, and we're both legitimately starstruck and really awkward. Not to be like too much of a Disney adult about it, but Minnie Mouse is so hot in person.
She's hot, but she's a bitch. You know she's a little bitch. Her and Daisy.
Slander.
No one wears little red pumps like that if they're a good person. That's all I'm saying.
Shall we dive in?
We are going to do such a hard vibe change now.
Into season 2, episode 18 of The West Wing, 17 people. Hello, welcome to Queer Gals Watch The West Wing.
Welcome back. This is just the kind of diabolical insanity you should expect from myself and Leigh today. Truly, 2 women on the edge, given the current political climate globally, I feel.
Yeah, just 2 women on the brink.
Yeah, and I'm sure many of you folks out there are joining us, just staring down into the pit and hoping that we don't fall. Or maybe just that we do and it all just ends.
Also, I should say this is our first ep that we're recording post in August. This is our first official episode that we're recording in the Trump era part 2. And I did just want to express my deepest kind of condolences and love and light and support for all of our listeners who may be Care Bears out there. Because I myself have been a long time and loyal Carrie Underwood fan. And sadly,
we've lost her.
Yeah.
It honestly, Leigh, it really shook me up. It shook me up.
I was always like, she's not commenting on politics because she's a Democrat and she knows how many Republican listeners she has. No.
Yeah, it was
no.
Truly the opposite. Carrie. Yeah, so our thoughts and hearts and wishes are with you all. But I think what we shall do, Leigh, is we should turn once more to the comfort, the safe, warm embrace, if you will,
of Y2K
and Aaron Sorkin's The West Wing.
Yes. Now, this episode title, very intriguing, 17 people. It immediately put me in mind of the 14 people that we know of who are aware of Jed's condition.
Yeah.
And I thought, who knew is going to find out? Because obviously then the previously on is very much kind of like hot on tying re-election, slippery snaky Hoynes, and Jed's MS.
Yeah, like I would love to get a full rundown of the 17 people because I feel like I'm losing grip slightly on who does and who doesn't know.
Which we do get later this ep.
Perfectly for a day where I'm feeling a bit rageful at the world. We're going to be spending the majority of this episode with my favourite Hardy boy, Toby Ziegler.
Our personal favourite own little Nancy Drew.
Yeah, very Nancy Drew for him. He's out, he's sleuthing. And what will he discover this week, Leigh?
He is Kim Possibling. He's got his combats on and he's ready to go.
Don't mention Kim Possible to me because I was speaking with a colleague of mine about kind of like queer awakening moments, and we both at the same time like just looked each other in the eye and said Kim Possible, and then we both had to walk away from one another. Honestly,
what an origin story.
Thank you, Kim. To all animated kind of queer icons out there, I say thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great. So let's dive into episode 18, season 2, 17 people. We're opening on Toby in his office. And just, Leigh, what I'm going to just call like a kind of crackers passage of time montage.
Yeah, he seems quite deeply unwell in this montage. It also appears that like over the course of maybe 3 to 5 days that he has neither left his office nor spoken to anyone.
No, it's giving David Fincher thriller, less kind of like a silly, fun political show with heart, you know?
Yeah, I kind of am like, for a moment, we're like in a political thriller or like a...
It's giving Spotlight.
It's giving Spotlight. It's giving like the Zodiac Killer.
Yeah.
You know, like there's something afoot.
It's giving like a kind of general feeling of grayscale.
Yeah.
Now, I've written something unhinged in our shared doc, Leigh, and that is that I've written, the bouncing of the ball is hot though, right?
I think you are just kind of attracted to quite angsty men. I think that's what's going on here.
Do you think? Okay. I just feel like Toby isn't a sporty guy, you know?
No.
But he knows his way around that rubber ball.
I think Toby is a squash guy. I think he plays squash.
I really see that for him, and I know that he would definitely wear squash goggles.
Prescription, of course.
I love him. But what I will say, for the fact that he sort of stays in his office for a few days, and you've got this as well, Leigh, is that in general, like, he's looking really well.
He's got like a fresh trim on what hair he has, and the beard is also looking manicured, more manicured than in previous seasons, I would say. It's previous season that we've watched.
I think Richard is just maybe like doing a bit more self-care in general.
Do we think Richard Schiff, maybe this was the moment in his life where he got a queer barber?
I would love that for him. I sent my partner to the queer barbers on our road to get his beard trimmed when we had our civil partnership. And honestly, he came back and he looked like a different person. And he was like, it was so nice. And they taught me like how to do it at home and like what I should be using on it. And I was like, yes, you should have a dialogue with your barber. Like you shouldn't be like sitting in silence for 2 minutes and then leaving. This is crazy. It's okay to care about yourself. Please use moisturizer. Aside from this sort of general time passing chaos, I would like to log that I would love for Leo in general to kind of be a bit more worried about Hoynes. Like Toby comes into Leo's office and is like, Hoynes is doing this thing about big oil. He's like going on this like little like speech tour. That's not like a play, right? And Leo's like, don't worry about Hoynes. Hoynes isn't going to do anything. And you're like, I feel like Jed's popularity rating isn't as bulletproof as we think it is. As we well know, he has swung.
But I think what we're running into here is like so many people dismissed Trump first time round. Yeah. They were like, he's never going to get elected, right? I think we are in 2000 in a time where like political norms feel really like concrete.
Yeah.
As opposed to the time we live in now where it's all gone up in flames. I think at that time, it would be like unheard of for a VP to kind of betray the president by running against him.
Yeah, whereas now we're like, that actually just seems quite normal. That seems more normal than other stuff that's happening.
I feel like there was a sense at that time of like waiting your turn.
Politics being like a gentlemanly sport.
Exactly.
Sigh. It was a simpler time. Wow. Let's not delve too deep into these emotions, Leigh, because we'll both start crying. This is Leo's take on Hoynes getting polling data. John Hoynes is an egomaniac who needs to know what people think of him. And then Toby's response is, well, that's pretty unusual for Washington, which is an ice cold zinger from him. Very good. And then there's some crazy suspense music. And the end of this cold open is truly insane, which is that Toby is sat in Leo's office in what I can only imagine is like the small hours in the dark. And Leo arrives for work. And like turns on the light in his office and Toby's just sat on the couch. And he's like, good morning.
Only once in my life have I walked into a dark room to find someone sitting on a couch in silence alone.
I did think of you when I saw this.
It is still one of the most unsettling experiences I have ever had.
Yeah. Like that's a jump scare. And Leo takes it very well. But so Hoynes is doing a speech in New Hampshire. Of all places.
That is like salt in the wound. That is a below the belt. Do you know how much Jed Bartlet loves New Hampshire and you're coming for him on his own turf? Are you joking?
Are you joking? And he's like sandwiched it in this kind of like personal camping trip, which apparently is like a classic kind of play.
Yeah. Like, I just happened to be in town.
Exactly.
Elsewhere in New England, go for it. Knock yourself out. If you want to like break up Jed's like general New England support, fine. Don't come for him in his home.
But also, if Hoynes is under the impression that Jed isn't going to do a second term because of his health condition, then why is Hoynes trying to stamp all over New Hampshire anyway when he can just be endorsed by Bartlet, which he's probably assuming he's going to get that endorsement?
Yeah.
It's
because he's a slippery little snake.
John Hoynes is an egomaniac.
And he wants to do it without Jed's support. He wants to be like, I don't need to thank Jed Bartlet for anything. I did this all on my own.
I delivered you the South. You know what, John? That was 4 years ago. You need to get over it. And that ends our cold open, which is basically kind of Toby Ziegler giving raised eyebrow and being like, Leo, why does John Hoynes think that Jed Bartlet isn't running again? Okay. Let's bring Jed into this convo.
Let's bring Jed into the mix.
Unsurprisingly, shock. Jed is pissed that Hoynes is doing this thing in New Hampshire.
Yes. I will say, I feel that this is a huge moment for Leo and Toby's relationship because Leo and Jed have kind of been like a two-man band. Like they are very much the inner... This is Toby being brought, the first of the wider staff to be brought into the very much like inner sanctum.
And for me, it makes a lot of sense because Toby has been there since day one of the Bartlet campaign. So like he is kind of the most trustworthy of our gang, really. And we decide that we're going to tell Toby. And what are we going to tell him? Everything. Leigh noted in the shared doc. What did you say, Leigh?
I think I was in a bit of a strange mood. I said, he is highlighting what I put. I said, I'm turned on by how good the writing is, which I stand by. I was scintillated because I was like, it's like three masterful actors just like in a room with a really, really good scene and such interesting power dynamics. And it's just like, we know what this conversation is, but we don't know what way it's going to go.
Yeah. And for me, I think it's because obviously it's got this grand scale, this situation with Jed's health, but I love it when the stakes are really high, but the focus is on the interpersonal, on the relationships that we have and the way that we share information between the characters. It's not like some far-flung thing that I need to care about. Like, it's not like about people that we're not seeing. It's like, we need to help these people in this place and do this sort of diplomacy, which can be harder to connect to. It's like, no, like, I have to stand in a room and lie to Toby Ziegler's face. Like, for me, that is phenomenal. I did kind of die slightly when Jed just was sat alone in the Oval Office and then just like says quietly to himself, now it starts.
He's a man of the theatre. He was once the stage manager in our town, lest we forget. Famously, history has its eyes on Jed and he knows it.
Meanwhile, with our spin boys, Leigh.
Please bring me to the spin boys.
I think I'm just going to coin CJ's phrase now and just refer to them as the spin boys from now on.
I think we should.
My spin boys. There is a storyline with Sam and Josh this week, which is honestly one of the funniest that they've ever been given.
This storyline absolutely killed me. So it opens with, you know what they did? They forgot to bring the funny. As do so many straight white male open micers, as I have experienced coming up as a stand-up. They truly forget to bring the funny. They just say the most offensive, outrageous thing they can think of so that people like shock laugh out of sheer awkwardness and then they think they've told a joke.
Yeah, awful.
Terrible.
So it's the White House Correspondent's dinner and a speech has been written by like 5 people for Bartlet to... I was going to say perform. I mean, in many ways perform. And it's not good.
No.
It's not funny. And I feel like of all the events, you've got to be bringing some game to that dinner.
As someone who like is a stand-up and a comedy writer, I did find it to be very funny that like Sam is an actual writer, so you can see where he has like a right to be in this room.
Yeah.
Because he is a speechwriter, which sometimes I imagine involves, I think Sam is often bringing like the earnest harsh.
Oh,
but you can
100%.
see that sometimes, you know, a speech is going to need a little bit of levity to break things up. What Josh refers, he's like, I'm going to go in and punch up the White House Correspondents' dinner. What business does Josh have punching up anything?
Absolutely none, Leigh.
He has no comedy background. Like,
no.
He has no writing background.
He just has ego, Leigh.
Just pure ego that he's like, I'm going to be able to do this better than anyone based purely on my own bravado.
And what I will say for Aaron Sorkin here is that he has done, specifically Josh, but also in many ways Sam, an absolute service by not allowing him to be funny.
Yeah.
And by making him unable to come up with any good jokes.
Yeah.
I am so thrilled that like we are reinforcing like this is not SNL.
No.
This is the executive branch of government. Like we're here to make laws, not jokes.
Yeah.
And so we're not going to be very good at it.
Mm-hmm.
I was absolutely thrilled at this and how hard they find it. And that this like little motley group this episode spend hours trying to come up with like gentle quips.
Which all of it's all happening also, it would appear to be on a weekend because they're all in their casual wear.
Which I love. Because Bradley can wear the hell out of a pair of blue jeans.
This is a strange thing that I'm about to say as a lesbian.
This is a safe space.
I don't know what it is about Bradley Whitford and Josh Lyman. I went into this being like, he is a man of like pretty average attractiveness.
Yeah.
I'm halfway through season 2 and the sexual allure of Bradley Whitford as Josh Lyman is building for me with each and every episode. And I'm so confused by it to the point where I'm now actively as a lesbian, like Josh Lyman is sexy. He annoys the hell out of me so much, but he's also, and I don't even want to use the word hot. I want to use the word sexy.
Leigh, you need to go to confession.
I'm so alarmed.
I think it's because, in my humble opinion, he's incredibly lesbian coded. Like he should be played by a queer woman.
Which we've discussed before.
And
we've discussed this before.
And should be costumed in exactly the same way.
Yeah.
And that's it. Full stop on that.
Full stop. Moving on. Now, and talk about scintillating scenes.
Leigh and I were truly, truly gagged by this whole scenario.
Gobsmacked. I would use the word gobsmacked.
Flowers, Leigh. I'm going to say flowers. I need you to take me there. What is happening?
Josh and Donna did like a walk and talk out of the quote writer's room where Josh is quote punching up this monologue. And he asks her if she liked the flowers that he sent her.
And the way that he's like,
do my ears deceive me?
He's like skipping along beside her and he's like, hey, did you like the flowers? And I was like, oh my God, it's happening.
He's made a move.
The bait and switch of this scenario was borderline illegal in my experience. I wish to receive damages emotionally for this. He sent her flowers because it's the anniversary of her coming back to work for him after she briefly left.
So the flowers were in fact a form of negging.
The man's fucking toxic. Why am I so attracted to
flowers to remind her of the fact that she left her job with him to go back to Dr. Freeride. So after the flashback that we saw in series 2, episode 2, what we're saying is Donna, after that really emotional moment that like moved us both to tears, where she was like, maybe I can make something of myself, she went back to Dr. Freeride.
There is so much lore here. Like, do we think he asked for her back? Or did she realize that she had feelings for Josh and like run back to her ex being like, this can't be happening. Like, I need to know, Leigh. She says, you send a woman flowers to be mean. You're the only man I know who can do that, you know. Joshua Lyman, what would your mother say? I wish I knew the first name of his mother.
I know. I feel like it's like Nancy.
Nancy Lyman.
Barbara.
Barbara.
You know,
Barbara Lyman. Until we know she's Barbara.
Fantastic.
Great.
Barbara Brenda Lyman. I would also like to note what I noticed in this is that this episode is very visually dark.
Yeah, it's very like evening-y and like, so I noticed that too. And I watched the episode twice. And the second time I watched it, I noticed when they're on this walk and talk and they're moving through like the corridors and into the bullpen, there's maintenance guys like doing work on the lights. So I think it was like an actual, really specific choice to make it like dark.
I think it's like Easter, because they talk about
Like
it being a holiday as well.
Easter's a really good shout, actually, because I was trying for the whole thing to work out what holiday it was about. We'll make very small mention before we move on of casual wear. Obviously, we've spoken about Josh's jeans, cute rolled up sleeves on a plaid shirt again, get away from me.
I think it's a jumper actually this time. It almost, dare I suspect that it looks kind of like an Aran jumper, or at the very least like a thick kind of cable knit jumper.
I can't do men in knits. It's too much for me. Like men of the 90s, like Billy Crystal in knitwear essentially is like the only type of man I'm attracted to. Slightly balding men in Aran jumpers.
Josh Lyman does have a little bit of a Billy Crystal vibe.
Oh my God, yeah. Yeah, okay, yeah, no, that is kind of maybe what it is. Which is like the really sharp wit.
Yeah.
And like snarky comments.
Yeah.
Donna, meanwhile, is wearing a gorgeous pale pink sweater and cardigan, which is a perfect colour with her alabaster skin.
Agreed.
And no one else, I think, could pull off that shade of baby pink.
No, it would wash most people out.
Yeah.
Also, I will just say, only Josh and Donna could fight over when their anniversary is without ever having actually been together.
Oh. Oh, shut up. Honest to God, do you ever get tired of your own voice? They're an old married couple.
Yeah.
But also, I agree with Donna, which is, I don't think Josh is allowed to comment on her ex.
No.
You know, there are times when, to put it simply, I hate your breathing guts.
I do love that in this world, Donna is allowed to say that to her boss.
And I will note, for the record, that in this kind of like back and forth around the flowers and the anniversary, Josh is really like going for it with like the wink, wink, cheeky, like nudge, nudge, like, aren't I so funny? And Donna is not happy about it. She's like trying to laugh it off, but actually I think it really fucking upsets her.
And what I will also say is this is quite fascinating coming on the heels of what we detected to be a kind of cooling off period in their relationship post Joey Lucas pointing out to Josh Donna's feelings. So I think what may have happened here is Donna then has tried to like re-professionalize the relationship, has maybe slightly distanced herself from Josh in a more of a kind of social informal setting. And then Josh has detected this, and his way of reeling her back in without actually having to make a move was the flowers.
Curveball, Josh. Maybe just tell people how you feel with clear language.
It's 2001, Fee. No one was doing that.
No, that's so true. Shall we move on to another one of our favorites who is in this episode?
Ainsley
Hayes is back. She's back on our screens. She opens with a little like Sam's come down to her office. The first thing one of the first things he says to her is, "You're adorable." And she just goes, "Yet ill-adored." She's so funny. I love her so much. And also Sam loves her so much.
Sam loves her so much.
So he's gone down to her office because essentially he's like, we're all staying late to hang out. Like, do you want to come hang out with me? Please, Sam, just take her out for dinner. For the love of God.
We're all getting Chinese and like just shooting the shit. Do you want to come?
Fucking hell. Men are so exhausting.
But then what is fascinating, and I loved, is that we get the drop of Ainsley's alma mater, which is Smith. And of course she has the same alma mater as Charlotte York. Of course she does.
That reads perfectly to me.
Yeah.
But I love the concept of like Ainsley Hayes like going back to Smith to like a dinner, like an alumni dinner, and like Charlotte York being
an alumni mixer,
and like Charlotte York being on the same like big round table as her because they were in the same sorority, but just at different times.
Yeah,
we love that cutaway scene. Okay, so it seems like what we're doing, Leigh, is walking into a double date of speech writing for this correspondence dinner. I feel like it's all a bit too cute.
Yeah.
Plus, again, for the record, I'd like it to state that Sam is also using the phrase punching up the script.
I feel like he's heard that phrase once used by a comedian when a comedian was coming in to, like, sometimes comedians come in to, like, introduce a president before they speak or whatever.
Yeah.
I feel like he's heard it and he knows that it's, like, official comedy terminology. And so he's just, like, throwing it in at every possible moment to show that he knows what he's talking about and he, like, knows the lingo.
100%. Do you know what? I think it's something that he and Josh heard the really sexy Cornelius saying, and then they've just adopted it. Meanwhile, Toby's furious, unsurprisingly. I was like, this scene was so, like, amazing, but it was so uncomfortable. And the actors are really leaning into that discomfort. Like, Leo trying to make small talk with Toby whilst they're waiting in the Oval Office is just, like, sensational performances, but it's so real, it's so palpable. Like, it was physically making my skin crawl.
Yeah.
Also, I think it was really smart while we're kind of, like, navigating how we're bringing Toby into the information about Jed's health condition, that we've got this, like, bubbling domestic terrorism storyline going on. And it's really nice to see, like, Jed being genuinely stressed about, like, presidential responsibilities and also kind of trying to keep his, like, personal life business together.
Yeah.
Because quite often we get to see, like, Jed be the really great diplomat or Jed be, like, the father or the husband. But it's really great to see him being both at the same time. And, like, you see the swan on top, but you can see the feet paddling underneath. And there's a lot of really, really great writing in this episode, which is, like, realizing that, Jed's wit and Jed's need to be funny so often comes from a place of vulnerability and needing to be the smartest person in the room because otherwise he feels like he's losing control.
Yeah.
It's phenomenal.
It makes you realize that in order to be, as it turns out, the leader of the free world, I think one of the most important skills almost must have to be being able to compartmentalize. So I can be in one meeting about one thing and be totally, like, emotionally, spiritually present in that issue. And then I can just walk into another room, completely leave that at the door and be totally emotionally and spiritually in the new thing, whatever's in the new room.
Yeah. Anyone who loves The West Wing just loves every episode. But if you've got a particular interest in, like, screenwriting and, acting for screen, this episode, I think, is a real masterclass in both of those things. Specifically, the scenes between Toby and Jed are just phenomenal.
Several of our listeners reached out ahead of time to say that they were, like, excited for this episode specifically because it's, like, one of their favorite episodes. Although I would also like to note, no CJ in this episode at all.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I've got a thought on that later on.
Okay, cool.
Back to our weird double date.
It does have such a vibe of, like, we've all gone out for malteds and we're just, like,
it's a bit high
shooting
school.
The shit. Yeah.
Also, like, the thing that made it feel very high school for me is, like, obviously it's, like, all, like, the kind of, like, takeout containers, like the little Chinese takeout containers and, like, bottles of soda. But then just the two other lads stuck there. That's what made it truly high school, because I was always one of those other lads. It's like there's always, like, a couple of couples and then just, like, either one or two people who weren't with anyone just, like, there as well at the movie night whilst everyone else is making out, and you're like...
What also makes it feel extremely high school is that Ainsley is wearing, like, a grey FBI sweatshirt and has a bow in her hair, which to me is such a specific vibe, which I don't think exists in the UK, of the pretty soccer girls in American high school.
Yes. It was giving soccer girl, but also I think it was giving, like, the hottie in band, because we know she was the hottie in band.
Totally. But, like, there's such a specific vibe of the soccer girls in high school, and for some reason they did always have bows in their hair. And I don't associate that with any of the other sports, and I don't know why.
Yeah. The kind of, like, clean ponytail with bow, I think, is a very American sports aesthetic. Whereas in the UK, the, like, sports aesthetic for girls at, like, high school was either I'm a lesbian
Mm-hmm.
And just I'm working out that at age 15, 16, and I don't really know how I want to do that yet. Or like quite a kind of preppy, messy bun, like kind of like posh girls, really. Bedraggled posh girl was like a big thing in like the aughts in the UK. So the flowers topic has come up again in our little weird writer's room. And Donna's like trying to shut it down. And Josh says, Donna doesn't like to talk about it. And Donna says, I really don't. And then Sam proceeds to dish to the room everything. And then he's like, oh, I'm sorry. I thought you meant you didn't want to talk about it. So I talked for you. And then he says, I'm a spokesman. It's in my blood. Which was one of my favorite lines from the whole episode.
Yeah, it's really good. It's really good. It's actually so much funnier than any of the actual jokes they write.
Yeah, I think that's what I love most about this episode. Is like all the jokes they write are trash, but all the things they say in that room are really funny.
Yeah.
Sam very earnestly ends the scene by saying, in half an hour, I want to make Toby laugh. And I think that's going to be a hard swing and a miss. Not only contextually for the day that Toby's having, but also, Sam, baby girl, in what world do you think you're going to make that man laugh?
On purpose.
On purpose.
I think that's more of like a lifetime goal.
Truly.
A once in my life, truly. I would like to make Toby laugh on purpose.
Before I retire,
I
would like to perhaps elicit a laugh from Toby.
It's not a today thing.
No, I wouldn't put a time constraint on that for now. Toby, meanwhile, is taking some air.
Yeah, which is fair. I mean, his professional life and his vision of the future has kind of just gone up in flames in the biggest of ways.
I would love to say, Toby, proud of you, because you're not smoking, and I feel like now's the moment that you probably would want to have a cigarette.
Totally. It's very much puts me in mind of the time that our dear friend of the pod, Amy, was like moments away from trying to open a large-scale commercial London show and discovered 2 weeks prior to the start of rehearsals that there was an archaeological dig in the middle of her set.
Yeah, they just sort of like drilled up the floor of said venue to do an archaeological dig. And then I think it was something like a day or so before the show opened that they were pouring fresh cement into it. It's very like, well, this is happening. And she was with us when she found out. And she was like, well, there's an archaeological dig. So
this happened, dear listener, in, I'm going to say, 2018. And it's still one of my favorite things that's ever happened. An archaeological dig in the middle of her venue. I feel like that is the day that Toby is having.
Which is like, I can't do anything about this. I just have to live in the chaos. And Toby strikes me as someone who doesn't enjoy that energy.
And I think we need to remember too that like Alyssa Mastromonaco in her book talked about, when she left the Obama administration, basically her whole career had been based around one man, supporting Barack Obama in various different roles. And at this point, Toby is like, my entire professional success has been based around Jed Bartlet. If Jed Bartlet is no longer a politician, I'm not anybody else's guy.
Yeah. And I'm going to be equally embroiled in backing the wrong horse.
Yeah.
We get a little bit of info about who are the people that know. So the First Lady, the three gals, Zoe, Elizabeth, Ellie, obviously Leo, and then, a few doctors and the radiologist who initially diagnosed Jed, and then obviously the anesthesiologist from when Jed had the gunshot wound. But we don't have any more names. That's not our full list. Then Leo says something that made me feel slightly sick, which was nobody was asked to lie. And I just feel uncomfortable and stressed whenever anyone says that, because I'm like, but do we know that for sure?
Yeah.
I don't know if we can cash that check. In other news, the terrorist threat is getting worse.
Yeah.
And Jed doesn't want to cause chaos because it's going to be about like adding new controls into like airports and around travel. And
raising the threat level, basically.
Yeah. And he's like, people are traveling for the holiday and I don't want it to be more chaotic. And I'm like, nice guy. He is a good guy.
And famously, he loves Jesus and he has risen. So you know, he wants people to be able to celebrate that.
Easter. I was like, what the fuck?
And that, dear listener, is the difference between being raised Catholic and not.
Okay, I'm sorry, but I mean, this is news to none of us, but Charlie Young is just the cutest. He's sat in his office outside the Oval Office, just reading his book.
Yeah.
Just waiting, just like passing time by just reading a nice, what I assume to be a non-fiction book.
I imagine some kind of memoir, perhaps, or maybe a history of a particular issue.
Yeah. He strikes me as someone who loves a bit of non-fiction.
I wouldn't be surprised if he's like reading along with Zoe's reading list for university.
Stop it. That's so cute.
So that they can like talk about what she's studying.
Oh my God, that's 100% what's happening. And also her just being like, oh, I finished this one, like, because I've written the essay on it, like, you can borrow it.
Yeah.
And like them doing like lots of like meeting up and like exchanging books. They're so cute. I miss Zoe.
We've not seen Zoe since like episode 2 of this season.
Yeah. So cue Josh entering and bothering Charlie with low-grade jokes. Charlie's like, oh, just FYI, maybe you can't do that joke just because the First Lady's not going to be at the Correspondent's dinner.
Which feels crazy.
Right? I mean, I know you're mad at Jed, Abby, but like, we do kind of need to save face specifically in front of the press.
Kind of the biggest night socially of the president's calendar every year.
Yeah.
It feels kind of wild.
It feels to me, and I hate to say this about a woman that I respect, but it feels very petty from Abby.
Yeah.
Like, she has a job. Her job is First Lady, and responsibility comes with that. As we well know from the current First Lady, I feel like there's lots of stuff potentially that maybe she would rather not do. But she turns up. She puts her sunglasses on and she goes to work. You know?
Yeah.
I would love to just touch in on this next topic, but we'll get into it in greater detail later, which is Sam at this point loses his mind because Ainsley is going back to Smith to be on like a panel
with Gloria Steinem.
With Gloria Steinem, name drop, about the ERA.
Yeah.
Which stands for Leigh?
The Equal Rights Amendment.
And that is essentially kind of a big deal because Ainsley opposes it.
Yeah.
And Sam's like, but you're a woman. And she's like, I know.
It's wild, yeah.
They get into this in quite a lot of detail later, and it's actually fucking amazing.
Yes, and also we're gonna get into the ERA and the merits or lack thereof of Ainsley's argument in our study session later.
Okay, juicy. Okay, yeah. I'm buzzed for that. Donna is on fire in this episode. A couple of quotes to throw out. Just one of them is, Josh, when you yell, you make it hard for people to find the funny. Love that. Keep bringing him down a peg or two. I think he needs it.
Yeah.
The lads are quite stressed about how the punching up is going.
Because as it turns out, actually, comedy is really hard.
It's quite a skilled thing.
It's actually really hard. It is actually a skill. And just because you can kind of make the lads laugh in the pub, it doesn't actually mean you're a comedian. Imagine that.
Maybe something for many people to take away from this
Just
episode.
something to reflect on in our own spare time, you know?
They close out this little scene with Sam Seaborn being like, look, Josh, like, we've got this. It's okay. Like, we're doing great. And then he turns back to the room and goes, we're doing great, right? And our two lads who are like nameless just go, Sam, we've got one here, but it relies on a John Wayne impersonation and a sock puppet. And I
would love to see Jed Bartlet's John Wayne impersonation. Did we not mention literally last week that we feel he probably is a John Wayne fan?
Yeah. Who are these two clowns? Who are these lads? I love them. That line made me like bark with laughter.
This is the thinking outside of the box that we need. This is the creativity that we need. It's not quite found its structure yet, But we're on the right track with the John Wayne and the sock puppet, I feel. More so than talking about some of the other jokes.
Yeah. But let's go back to the world's most uncomfortable conversation.
Yeah.
So, Leigh, this is one for us specifically, and I wonder if any of our listeners can relate, which is, so Jed uses a lot this term, like episode, like, oh, I had an episode, when he's talking about moments of like more ill health. And I just put in our shared doc, Leigh, does that give you the energy of both of our respective families using the phrase like funny turns?
Yeah, when like a grandparent has a stroke and it gets referred to as a funny turn.
Yeah.
As if they've kind of gotten up and done a number.
Yeah. And I understand why parents say these things because they're trying to protect you. But when you're a grown adult, you'd just like to know if people have, suffered a traumatic medical event.
I just don't know that funny turn is an appropriate descriptor for what is in fact a near-death experience.
Yeah, or like something that is going to be part of a long-term condition. So this is just a, PSA to anyone who's like, I think it's probably best to say episode or funny turn. Just tell people what's happening.
Just give me the deets.
So I feel like Toby is with us, Leigh, because he's kind of frowning quite a lot when Jed's like, I had one of these episodes. And Toby's like, what do you mean by that? Like, what is the fact of like how you were ill? Because that's directly relating to like whether or not you've committed a crime.
And whether or not you're like capable of decision making.
Yeah.
As arguably the most powerful person in the world in 2001.
Then there is an insanely uncomfortable moment, which is incredible, which is Toby being like, how do you treat this illness? Like, are you medicated? And
because the military doctors who are supposed to be taking care of you are not aware that you have MS.
And then Jed's like, oh, I received like these injections. And Toby's like, and who does that? And Jed says, a doctor. And then Toby says, is your wife medicating you? And Jed Bartlet looks at Toby like he could fucking punch him in the face. And he just says, I think it best while temperatures are running a little high that you refer to my wife as Mrs. Bartlet or the First Lady. Whoa.
It's amazing because like I feel like Jed doesn't pull rank that often. We've only ever seen him do it to like a political foe.
Yeah.
With the famous, when the president stands, nobody sits. We've seen other people pull his rank on his behalf.
Yeah.
But this is, I think, maybe only the second time we've seen him directly pull his rank.
Yeah. And I love that he's like, don't you fucking talk about my wife. Low-key obsessed with that. And actually, what was then very interesting to me, and it kind of explained why this whole scenario is happening with Toby Ziegler rather than Josh Lyman, was that Toby then kind of loses it. And understandably so.
And I was like, is that Toby Ziegler raising his voice in the Oval?
He does. He raises his voice in the Oval and he shouts at the president. And I was like, why do I feel like status-wise, actually he's allowed to do that? And I think it was because I was like, oh, okay, Josh is Leo's deputy. Toby isn't anyone's deputy.
Toby reports directly to the president.
Yeah. And I was like, okay, cool. And he's been there like the longest. I think he's got more skin in the game with Bartlet to be like, no, dude, like you fucked up. And also, how dare you not tell me?
Yeah.
He says, for 90 minutes that night, there was a coup d'etat in this country. And I really feel like give the man an Emmy.
Toby is really feeling his full, or rather Richard Schiff is really feeling his full inner RSC Shakespearean actor through this monologue. He's giving it the stakes of like Greek tragedy. And I loved it because not every actor can pull that off.
Him and Martin Sheen are like toe to toe in this scene. And both of them are furious. And like the script is so good because it's not just bluster. It's like,
no,
it's so specific what they're talking about and the ways in which they've been hurt. It's phenomenal.
Say it takes a really, really skilled actor with a really powerful presence to not lose status by shouting.
Yeah. And to know when to do that on purpose because the character is losing status.
Mm-hmm.
But this was phenomenal. Like, Toby goes off like he's like having this massive rant and he stops and like gives pause. And then Jed's just behind his desk in the fucking Oval Office and he goes, I feel fine, by the way. Thanks for asking.
And what gives Toby power about that is the only people that we have seen push Jed so far into a corner that it makes him make a petty retort are Leo and Abby. Nobody else has forced him into saying something a bit bitchy and a bit petty because he has no other argument to make.
Yeah.
He has nothing grounded and nothing worthy to say in response. So he just has to say something a bit bitchy and flippant.
He's got no explanation for Toby. Toby's like, why did you do that? And Bartlet can't say anything other than like, this is my private business, which is kind of bullshit.
But also, wow, Daddy Bartlet is mad. I don't think he expected that to go the way that it did. I think Leo saw it as being a possibility, but I don't think Jed foresaw it.
He says, your indignation would be a lot more interesting to me if it weren't quite so covered in crap.
And I'm like, I'm sorry, I don't feel it is covered in crap.
No.
I think that everything that Toby is saying is perfectly legitimate and founded.
Yeah. I think the thing that I find disappointing from Leo is that like Leo was too scared to have this difficult conversation. And he should have had it a long time ago. And I think he's found it hard to like navigate his friend's emotional response to difficult scenarios. And I think Leo's been a bit of a coward.
I will also say though, I think maybe Leo felt that he didn't have a leg to stand on because Jed stood by him through his addiction.
That's so true. You kept my secret, I'll keep yours.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Whereas Toby doesn't believe in the bro code fundamentally.
Yeah, no, he's not a bro. Toby has a very, very clear moral compass.
He is Dido. He will go down with this ship.
Yeah. Yeah, what a jam. You put in the shared doc, Leigh, why do I feel like Josh is going to bring us up to 17 and be the 17th person?
I was convinced because Josh was kind of hanging around waiting for Toby to be done chatting to Charlie, and everyone was raising their voices so much. I was like, Josh is going to overhear. We're going to get to the end of the episode and we're going to see Josh around the corner of the colonnade being like, what?
Papa? Back in the Roosevelt room with our kind of high school gang, again, just a shift in vibe. We have a phenomenal line from Sam Seaborn.
Self-deprecation is the appetizer of charm, which really floored me. It's the wisest thing that Sam Seaborn has ever said. I will be meditating on it for some time.
He's very wise. Then I'd love to counter that, Leigh, with this joke from Donna, which is, knock, knock, who's there? Sam and his prostitute friend.
Which, whilst not being funny, is also so ice cold.
She's taken no prisoners this week. She really isn't. And then we need to decode some of this, Leigh.
We need to heavily decode the following.
Okay, so so Josh is out of the room.
Yeah.
And
crucially
he's not present. And there's a discussion of like, why are you so bothered by the flowers? And would you like to give your
Do you know how much grief I took from him when I got back? None. I walked in the door, he said, thank God there's a pile of stuff on the desk. This is his way. He's just going to snark me every April. Prince of passive-aggressive behavior. So he didn't say anything to her when she came back, which to me says, I love you.
Honestly, she's known for a really long time how she feels about Josh. And she's also known for a really long time that he'll never say how he feels about her. And the fucking emotional labor of that scenario on Donna is huge. And the flowers are a reminder that she's continuing to do this slog that will never change.
And like play along with this charade.
He will never, ever tell her. And I suppose, lots of people have been there when they've had feelings for someone that maybe you don't know if they're requited or you think that they are, but that person won't say. Like, it's a really tough place to be in.
If you would like to talk about me as a university student, we can just talk about me as a university student.
But I think the thing that's actually the most damaging in those scenarios, and I've got a friend who is sending me truly phenomenal sort of 6 and 8 minute long voice notes about this sort of scenario at the moment, is just that it's not necessarily the hurtful thing of them turning around and saying that they don't want you.
It's the fact that they never actually tell you how they feel or how they ever felt.
And it's the investment of your time and your emotion waiting for that.
And then even after it's over, wondering if you were crazy the whole time or whether there was something there for a moment in time.
And if you
just
said
missed
something,
each other,
then would it be different? The whole thing is insane. And I just feel like Donna is shattered.
Yeah.
And the flowers are this reminder that she's just continued to invest in this man. He'll never say that he loves her, but will show it all the time.
Yeah.
For a moment, we have a lovely Sam and Ainsley toe-to-toe once more that's kind of taking us back to like Capital Beat vibes. I say, when will they kiss? The show says, ooh, maybe never, maybe now. They're heading to the mess to get coffee and maybe cheesecake. And I love that. I love that Ainsley loves a sweet treat. And then we have this like really fun argument about the Equal Rights Act.
Yes.
On like a walk and talk in like the evening late night corridors of the White House.
It's really sexy.
It's really hot, right?
I'm sorry, I keep using the word sexy today. I don't know what's wrong with me. It's the Lord's Day. It's a Sunday. And we're also talking like the Jesus and the abortion rights of it all. There's just a lot going on.
I just love how they write Ainsley as just a fucking smart Republican.
I can't believe that Aaron Sorkin actually managed to find a way to argue against the Equal Rights Amendment that I can actually follow the logic of. And in many ways, I'm like, Trump should be getting Aaron Sorkin to write his stuff.
Yeah. I love how Ainsley never lets Sam speak as well. Like, she's always cutting him off. Like, his only lines, if you saw that dialogue written out, would just be like the starts of sentences. And I just think her cute little FBI sweater is everything. Meanwhile, Toby's head is in his hands. This is not going well. We know that when the head is firmly in the palms, we're not in a good place. Information from this scene is that Hoynes is one of the 16.
Yeah, which makes sense.
I mean, I do think that it would have been even more crazy if, in terms of like the reasons why you might need to step up as vice. Yeah. It makes sense as to why he knew. But this is the information that we thought that kind of Toby had deduced at the start, which is Hoynes doesn't think Jed is going to run again.
Yeah.
And Toby's like, but Leo, you and I stood in the Oval Office and shook hands that we would do it again. So like, are you fucking, do you think I'm an idiot? Like, what's going on here? And Leo's like, no, he's gonna run. He's gonna run. And Toby's like, but Hoynes thinks that he isn't. So like, there's bad blood already. Because if he's gonna run, we need to talk to Hoynes about that now.
Yeah.
And Hoynes has this huge piece of ammo that could destroy any presidential campaign. Understood. And I know that Toby is a worst case scenario Wendy, but I feel like we need that energy. Like Leo is being so passive right now.
And do we have a slight inkling also that maybe Leo really likes power? Because he did just kind of like take the helm during when Jed was under anesthetic, and he's convinced that Jed is going to be running again. Is there a slight, obviously we love Leo, but is there a slight thing that we're starting to get threaded through that Leo doesn't want to let go of power?
I think Leo's a Virgo, and I think that he's like, the thing is, at the end of the day, I'll just do it, and I'll just get it done. And that's my job, is just to continually work and like help everyone and do everything, and never relinquish any sort of control. So like, I don't see what the problem is with me just like doing everything and running the country. Like, I don't see why there's a problem, Toby. And Toby's like, are you fucking kidding me? That's like illegal. So don't do that. Meanwhile, let's go back to Insanity. We're back in our makeshift writer's room, opening with Donna saying, see, the thing about me is that mine is a dry wit.
Every first line when we snap back to the writer's room of it all is like an absolute corker.
Yeah, and which in no way they can use in the speech.
Yeah. It really like is such an extreme gear shift every time from like the intensity of the Oval Office.
Yeah. We then have this lovely little back and forth between Ainsley and Sam, because Sam is just like reeling. He can't get his head around this ERA thing at all. Would you like to be Sam Seaborn?
Sure. So guys, when I was downstairs, I made a decision. I'm going to register with the Republican Party, and I'll tell you why if you're curious. It's because they're a freedom-loving people.
We also like beef. Ainsley's so funny.
Yeah.
She's so funny. And like, I think she's trying to be funny, but she does it in like a really like casual kind of way that I can't help but respect.
Yeah. I would love that energy from more of my Republicans, you know?
Yes. Speaking of which, Leigh, do you want to explain like, so Ainsley then has this like phenomenal little speech where she talks about her personal opinion on the ERA. And you wrote some really nice things in the shared doc. So do you want to get into those?
I just can't believe that like Republican talking points have made me proud to be an American here. Because in the words of Ainsley Hayes, and we're going to kind of unpack this later, because it's humiliating, a new amendment we vote on declaring I'm equal under the law to a man. I'm mortified to discover there is reason to believe I wasn't before. I'm a citizen of this country. I'm not a special subset in need of your protection. I do not have to have my rights handed down to me by a bunch of old white men. The same Article 14 that protects you protects me, and I went to law school just to make sure. And with that, I'm going back down to the mess because I thought I may have seen there a peach.
I'm so glad.
That's such a gorgeous little button on the end of it.
I thought I might have seen there a peach. I'm so glad that they write her like this. Like, she's so smart and she turns all stereotypes like on their head. And I love how really awful Republican stereotype characters can exist in this show, and we've met them. But also they allow space for like up and coming, really exciting political figures in the Republican Party, like Ainsley Hayes. And I would say that she is truly a Republican, rather than like the stereotype that Republicans can become and may have become, in some people's opinion, over the last couple of decades.
Yeah. I love that all that Sam has to give back in response is, I could have countered that, but I already moved on to other things in my head.
I will say this for Sam Seaborn. He is usually like very gracious when being beaten by intellectual women. Like capital B, famously the intern.
Famously,
Laurie.
Yeah, with the funky fringe.
With the funky fringe. I just think that like when he knows he's outsmarted, he knows he's outsmarted.
Yeah.
Whereas Josh Lyman does not. Okay, let's get into it with Josh and Donna. So we're in Josh's office. Donna walks in. Firstly, Josh is trying to get a file from the top of a cabinet and pulls down all the files on top of himself. Very good physical comedy. Well done, Bradley. We know you're a physical comedian. Then Donna sits down and just starts going, Josh, Joshua, Josh. Which worries me.
Yeah.
Then Josh says something insane.
He makes mention of her having a Catholic school uniform underneath her clothes, which is fucking crazy as her boss.
Where does he get off talking to her like this?
It's wild. I love, though, that Donna responds by saying, okay, what I need is for you to stop being like you for a second.
Yeah, this reads for me. So she says, you know, when I came back to work for you, Josh, I had a bandage on my ankle.
Always a worrying premise to a story.
And I was like, what's happened? What's happened? Tell me what's happened. And she said, you know that I said that I slipped on my driveway.
I'm immediately like, she didn't slip. She didn't slip, Fiona.
She didn't slip.
She did not slip.
She says, what actually happened is I was in a car accident. Then this is where I lost my mind. Yeah. Josh is like, you were in a car accident? I thought it was because you didn't put out the kitty litter on the ice. And then he just says, you told me it was a late thaw.
And then Donna is just like, you can see on her face, she's like so touched that Josh remembers her exact words. And Donna being touched by Josh remembering her exact words moved me to tears.
But also I'm like, Josh, if you remember what she said, it is because you love her.
Yeah. Most people don't remember when their EA sprains an ankle.
And how that EA may have done it.
No.
Anyway, he's kind of like a little bit bolshy with her. And she's like, you can see that like she's a bit moved. And she's like, what do you want me to say, Josh? Yes, you are better than my old boyfriend.
Because her boyfriend stopped on the way to see her in the hospital after the car accident for a beer.
What a fucking prick. I would love to know if that happened to someone in the writer's room on this show. Because it's such a good story of a really shitty boyfriend or girlfriend to be like, the moment I knew that I needed to just end it was when I hurt myself and they stopped on the way for a beer. Like, it's too good for that not to be real and have happened to someone.
Yeah.
Then as Josh walks out the room, he just turns and looks at her and says, if you were in an accident, I wouldn't stop for a beer.
And then she says, if you were in an accident, I wouldn't stop for red lights.
And then she just walks past him and out of the room. How did both of them leave that interaction with... Leigh, I have physical goosebumps all over my body.
Physical goosebumps, full body goosebumps.
How do you leave that interaction without grabbing someone and kissing them? Like, that's probably the most fucking beautiful and romantic... Like,
what are we doing
sorry,
here? Guys, what are we doing here? You're his EA.
You've just told each other that you love each other.
This
I'm sorry,
is not
but there's
normal.
there's no other way to interpret either of those lines from them without that meaning, I love you too. I'm sorry, Leigh. Am I wrong?
No. In fact, I would say it's I love you more.
Fucking hell. When is this gonna happen? I honestly, it's draining me, Leigh. I need something. Give me something, Aaron. Give me a touch of a hand, a caress of a face. I just need to know this is going somewhere. Anyway, back in the Oval Office with Jed Bartlet and possible worries of impeachment, Jed is like, I want people to get home for the holidays. I don't want people to be away from their families. He also says to Toby, I have no intention of apologizing to you, Toby.
Why is Bartlet sexy when he sets boundaries? Why are boundaries hot?
I think because people haven't respected ours ever. So when we see people setting them, we're like, wow. Yeah, I mean, I think the thing is, if Bartlet's going to be petty, which he is going to be petty in this scenario to some degree, I do appreciate him being like, oh no, like I know I'm being an asshole. Like, just so you know, like I am being an asshole. I'm not going to apologize to you and turn around and say, I'm sorry for behaving this way. I stand by this behavior. I do kind of appreciate that. And then it kind of just like ends with like them being like quite terse with each other.
Yeah.
And that's kind of how we close out the episode, is like Toby being like, you know, you're going to have to like speak to a lawyer about this. Like, we're going to have to lawyer up. And Jed's like, really? And I really feel for Toby, because it feels like he's suddenly looking down the barrel of a huge new workload, and a workload that's secret.
Yeah.
Which is tough. Like, the foreshadowing is really stressful.
And also we are in episode 18 of this season. So we are ramping up, and it kind of is becoming clearer to me that this is going to be like the story of the finale of our season.
Yeah. And I don't like it when Toby's sad. Like, the episode finishes with essentially like Bartlet like dismissing him, and then Toby walking into our writer's room and then being like, hey Toby, listen to this one. And Toby like trying to join in, and like it broke my heart, him like pretending to like be interested in what was happening.
Once again, Toby is Emma Thompson smoothing that bedspread in Love Actually.
God, trying to get the kids out the door to the nativity.
Yeah. Josh and Sam are the lobster. They are in the papier-mâché costumes.
My darlings, look at you. Sorry, all that cake and ice cream.
I would love to just note, obviously we've had no CJ. I'm also clocking in on the other female characters that I'm concerned have gone to Mandyland. Zoe, are we just going to refer to her and never actually see her again? Gina Toscano, we've not seen in a worrying length of time.
Yeah, I'm honestly worried because we haven't touched base with Zoe since the shooting, and I'd kind of love to know how she's doing post attempted murder of her boyfriend and near fatal shooting of her father. Would love a check-in.
Would love a check-in. And also, it feels concerning to me that I don't want Ainsley to be like, who fills in when we're missing CJ from an episode? Do you know what I mean? I just kind of feel like, is there not space for both of them in one storyline?
Is there not space for 3 female characters in one storyline, Aaron? Just raising that, something for you to think on. My thought was, if you want to punch up a speech, like, why are we not asking CJ?
Yeah.
Straight up. She's the funniest. Like, she knows how to turn a phrase behind a podium.
She's the one character who actually like quips in public on the daily.
Yeah. And I was like, I hope that in the world of this episode, CJ was invited to help punch up the speech and was just like, I have plans.
I respectfully decline.
It's an evening off for me and I have plans. And she just went downtown to have cocktail with some of her friends. And she needs a night away from her spin boys, you know?
Yeah.
And that brings us to the end of the episode.
Into the quick fires.
Yeah, straight in.
Best fashion, Fee.
Best fashion for me, I feel once again, and we did get into this in some detail, but just Joshua Lyman's casual wear.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I hate to be that girl, but apparently I am. Honourable mention to the FBI sweater and bow from Ainsley, though.
Absolutely, yes.
What could a British or Irish politician never get away with?
I couldn't agree more with what you've put in the shared doc, which is having a sexy shouting match with a colleague.
Yeah, like
Yeah.
conflict in the workplace in American dramas is so much more fit than in British ones.
Because there's no one there going, oh,
or going, I couldn't possibly say. Sorry to my country people. How long until our kind of bingo card of issues, guns, abortion, free speech, religion come up? I mean, I feel like the president's like moral responsibility to share information about themselves with the voting public feels like a pretty big one.
Also kind of the women's lib movement.
Yeah, love that, getting a bit of air, because honestly, I feel like women in politics and kind of feminism so far has been quite poo-pooed by this show. Quite a lot of like, oh God, it's some sort of Democratic Women from Michigan conference.
With the obvious exception, obviously, of Andrea.
Yeah. But like,
she's also slightly defined by being Toby's ex-wife. So,
for sure.
Yeah.
Best writerly moment for you, Leigh?
So guys, when I was downstairs, I made a decision. I'm going to register with the Republican Party, and I'll tell you for why if you're curious. It's because they're freedom-loving people.
We also like beef. Very good. Very good. Well done, team. I think mine was, we're doing great, right? Sam, we've got one here, but it relies on a John Wayne impersonation and a sock puppet. I just enjoyed them. Man, I feel like a man.
I could have countered that, but I've already moved on to other things in my head. Also, I would like to give honourable mention to when Jed Bartlet, just in the Oval Office, shouts, "Shut up."
Yeah, that was wild. Mine, I think, is probably Jed really petulantly saying, "I feel fine, by the way, thanks for asking," which just feels very masculine to me. Now, I have an option for girl, I feel like a girl, which is a line from Josh Lyman, but equally I feel like is, encapsulating womanhood, which was, you told me it was a late thaw.
Couldn't agree more. It is our Nicholas Sparks moment of the episode.
Truly. And Leigh, the moment that made you proudest to be an American?
Ainsley Hayes' speech against the ERA, which actually in many ways fundamentally goes against everything I believe in.
Yeah.
But it made me proud to be an American nonetheless.
Because I feel like it encapsulates a lot of what being American is about, which is like freedom of speech, and like, this is my opinion and this is how I interpret the constitution of our country. And I'm like, you go, girl. You go.
Pop off.
Pop off, Ainsley. And with that, Leigh, shall you take us into the study session?
Yes. We are going to go into what even is the ERA and who even is Alice Paul.
Tell me more.
Have you heard of Alice Paul before?
Shamefully, I've not.
Incredible. So we begin with the Declaration of Independence.
Lovely. Let's start at the beginning.
Famously, we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal and that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, aka the Will Smith movie of the same name.
Honestly, what a film. The scene where, I can't get into this, it's not interesting, Misha, don't worry, cut that out. But I really love that movie. It fucks me up, man. Hard cry, sobbing, cold flannel on the face.
Now, you may have noted that actually only referred to men.
Which I guess is why the Schuyler sisters are singing about it in Hamilton.
Truly, yeah. Now, I'll take you to Seneca Falls, New York in 1848.
Please do.
Where the first Women's Rights Convention gathered a crowd of 300, including Elizabeth Kate Stanton, who was speaking at a podium. Imagine a woman speaking in 1848.
Also 300 of them in one place. Like, that's actually incredibly impressive for the time.
Literal bonnets, hoop skirts, the lot. And she said, we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men and women are created equal. And she basically called for the country to give women the same rights as men. And the radical first step that they were looking to move towards, Fee, was getting women the right to vote.
Yeah. I feel like the suffrage movement in the States was happening at quite a similar time to the suffrage movement in the UK.
We're going to get there.
Sweet.
So Elizabeth Stanton actually, unlike her British counterparts, her firm allies were the abolitionists Lucretia Moss and Frederick Douglass. So I know that obviously the suffrage movement in the UK has been criticised as being extremely white kind of only fighting for the rights of kind of rich white women. Whereas it's a much more intersectional feminism that we're looking at even at this time in the States. Yeah. So now the Civil War happens, right? And we get the Emancipation Proclamation, and the 14th Amendment after the Civil War and the Emancipation Proclamation gives Black men the right to vote. And the 14th Amendment is what Ainsley Hayes references in her speech.
She's like, that's what's protecting me. Why do I need the ERA?
Now, Elizabeth Stanton, who I quoted previously, Susan B. Anthony, and Sojourner Truth are arguing that women should have the same rights as Black men. The 14th Amendment, however, was not intended to apply to women because it happened before the 19th Amendment, which ultimately gave women the right to vote.
Interesting.
And to prove this, prior to the 19th Amendment happening, Susan B. Anthony voted in 1872 on the basis of the 14th Amendment in the presidential election and was arrested 2 weeks later and convicted of illegal voting.
That's pretty fucking rock and roll.
Yeah. And at her trial, she tried to use the 14th Amendment to defend herself, but the judge ruled that the amendment didn't apply to her because she was a woman.
That's so interesting.
So for me, that's part of where Ainsley Hayes' argument kind of falls down, because she's using the basis of the 14th Amendment to say that she has the same rights as men. But historically, that doesn't bear out.
No, because she's going to go to Smith and say that, and then Gloria Steinem's going to be like, know your history.
Now, Elizabeth Stanton and Susan B. Anthony both died without ever casting a legal ballot. But as a spoiler for where we're going to get to, in 1919, by a margin of 1 vote, Congress did pass an amendment giving women the right to vote, and which was ratified by the final state in 1920. So it's a long period of history between 1848 and 1920 when women finally do get the right to vote. Now, where did the ERA come from? The ERA, or the Equal Rights Amendment, was introduced in Congress in 1923, so 3 years after women get the right to vote, by a woman named Alice Paul. Now, Alice Paul is the daughter of Quakers. Hey, Dewey Lucas.
Oh, yeah.
The Quaker faith has one of its kind of central doctrines is gender equality.
Okay, cool. I didn't know that.
Neither did I. And so her parents really impressed upon her and her siblings the importance of working to better society and to kind of avoid materialistic pursuits. She graduated first in her class from high school in 1901 and enrolled in Swarthmore College, a co-ed school, which also so Smith was originally a women's college, right? Whereas she's in 1901, she's in a co-ed college, which had actually been co-founded by her maternal grandfather, William Parry, in 1864, who believed that women and men should get an equal Quaker-inspired education, which we love.
Thanks, William.
Thank you.
Ahead of your time.
And so she was taught at Swarthmore by some of the leading female academics of her time. Her mathematics professor, Susan Cunningham, was one of the first women ever admitted to the American Mathematics Association. She was a very active student. She was a member of the executive board of the student government. She was an Ivy poetess. She spoke at her commencement ceremony. Hello, Hillary Rodham. And she also, Fiona, and take what you will from this, played field hockey, tennis, and basketball.
Interesting.
Something to marinate on.
Couldn't possibly comment on what that might insinuate. Just imagine had a lot of close female friends.
Yeah.
Cool.
Her dad is quoted as saying, "Well, when there is a job to be done, I bank on Alice."
That's a lovely quote to have, your parents say about you.
Specifically your dad. In, again, 1901.
Crazy.
So she decides that she's going to pursue the kind of newly coined field of social work. And in 1907, she moves where, Fiona? To Birmingham in England to pursue social work.
Shut up. Really?
Yeah.
That is, do you know what? That's insane though. At that time, to travel alone as a woman And then go, of all places, with respect, but like in 1907, like Birmingham, we're like...
Dark place.
But like, we're like industrial revolution, like huge amounts of like poverty, terrible health.
Therefore, in need of social workers.
Yeah.
But she's like a professional woman in a foreign country in 1907, which is wild. And in England, Fee, is where she is transformed from a reserved young Quaker gal into a militant suffragist.
Please continue to tell me more about this woman.
So she's in the streets of Birmingham one day. She sees this woman speaking on a stage and she's being like heckled by this mob. And they're like jeering over her and they eventually force her from the stage. And the woman is speaking about women's suffrage, getting women the right to vote. And Alice is like appalled by this sight. And she's like, I'm going to go over and introduce myself to this woman. Now, this woman turned out to be none other than Christabel Pankhurst.
Really? Of course it was.
Now, obviously, as you well know, Fiona, but for our American listeners, the Pankhursts led a kind of like militant faction of suffragettes whose motto was deeds, not words. And they believed that kind of, like prayer and petitions and being patient were not ultimately going to get anyone anywhere.
No.
And so they engaged in direct action, what we would now think of as direct action, heckling, window smashing, rock throwing.
I think they blew up some post boxes as well.
They did, yeah. I mean, it escalated.
Yeah.
So Alice Paul joins the suffragettes.
Love.
In the UK. And in an interview, she claimed to have personally broken 48 windows. She was arrested multiple times, imprisoned multiple times. And she was one of the suffragettes in the UK who like went on hunger strike.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And was subject to force feeding.
Yeah.
Which, if anyone has not seen the film Suffragette starring Carey Mulligan, that really shows you what the kind of hunger strike and force feeding process was. It's horrific. Like, these women were hard as fuck.
Yeah. And obviously a lot of the people in the suffrage movement in the UK were these very rich, powerful white women, but they inspired a huge amount of activism in working class women. And a lot of the time, the people who were being arrested, who were subject to a lot of this like violence whilst they were arrested, were average working women who wanted to be able to vote, who probably wouldn't be looking at, equality as a way to, inherit land or wealth because they didn't have any. And like to think that Alice was hanging out with those gals feels pretty great.
Pretty cool.
Yeah.
So she, at around this time, is quoted as saying, "The militant policy is bringing success. The agitation has brought England out of her lethargy. And women of England are now talking of the time when they will vote instead of the time when their children would vote, as was the custom of a year or two back." So with this newfound perspective, she really believes that the English suffragettes have like worked out how to do it in a way that American suffragists had not at this point kind of worked it out. And so she comes back to the US, and she's only 26 by this time. She comes back to the US and she joins the National American Women's Suffrage Association. And she pretty quickly gets like a leadership position because she's got all this experience from being in England. Now, she joins this organization together with Lucy Burns, who was an American who she met in a London police station after being arrested at a demonstration at the entrance to Parliament. They participated in lots of demonstrations together and had several times been arrested and jailed together.
Legends.
One might say they were close personal friends.
Close personal friends. Companions, if you will, perhaps.
Now they, under, I believe we're going to say NAWSA is the like acronym for this organization. They design a huge elaborate parade of 8,000 women of all classes to march Pennsylvania Avenue on March 3rd, 1913, which is the day before Woodrow Wilson's inaugural parade.
Ooh.
The parade was led by Inez Mulholland, who is a lawyer, activist, and socialite, and very committed suffragette. And she's dressed in kind of like Greek robes, riding a white horse.
Shut up, really?
Yeah.
This is incredible. Like, I don't want just a march. Like, give me pageantry. Give me pageantry.
I don't know why there has not been a film made about Alice Paul's life.
Yeah.
I really don't. Now, pretty soon, the parade route is lined by hundreds of hostile men.
Oh, shock.
Yeah. They actually only made it a few blocks before these hostile men start kind of shouting at them, heckling them, and it all ends in kind of physical violence and assault. And the police just kind of stand by and watch.
Again, shock.
Now, after this experience, Alice Paul believes that they need to kind of continue to take a more kind of militant approach. And she breaks with NASA because they kind of saw Woodrow Wilson and the Democrats as like their allies. But Alice Paul wanted to take the Pankhurst training of like all political parties and all people in power need to be held accountable for the fact that women continue to be disenfranchised.
Yeah.
And so after she breaks with the original organization in the US that she joined, she then forms the National Women's Party. And in 1917, she organized the first public picketing of the White House in US history.
Amazing.
Because no one had kind of dared
to do
publicly
that.
protest a president like that before. And they held banners saying things like, "Mr. President, how long must women wait for liberty?" They were known as the Silent Sentinels because over 18 months from January 1917, in all weathers, need I say, winter in DC, intense.
Yeah.
Over 1,000 women stood quietly outside the White House gates through all weathers, not speaking and not interacting with passersby. And they were there 6 days a week for a year and a half.
That's impressive.
Now, at first, Woodrow Wilson is kind of like politely bemused by them.
Sure,
he
sure.
tips his hat to them. He doesn't really know how to respond. But then World War I breaks out and Woodrow Wilson goes, okay, now this is actually unpatriotic.
Okay.
And the general public is kind of on his side. They're like, we need a moment of national unity because we are at war now. You don't get to protest now. But Alice Paul is like, no, I'm upping the ante. She says that it is hypocritical for Wilson to be trying to support democracy abroad, but not fully supporting democracy at home because half of the population can't vote. So she brings out new banners calling him Kaiser Wilson.
That's actually like really savage, but I'm also really enjoying the wordplay there.
Yeah. Now, again, they're attacked by angry mobs of men. And within weeks, 168 women have been arrested. And much like the Pankhursts, they want to be treated as political prisoners.
Yeah.
But they are not. And therefore, they, again, like the Pankhurst movement, they go on hunger strike and are subject to force feeding. In context, like not only were they not being treated as political prisoners, the suffragists were being beaten. They were being held in cold and unsanitary conditions, rat-infested cells, and they were being beaten, including like older, frail women.
Yeah, it doesn't. It's not good, is it? Like it's not a good reflection.
No. Alice herself was sentenced to 7 months, and she was in solitary confinement for 2 weeks. She immediately went on hunger strike. When she wasn't able to walk, she was taken to the prison hospital, and other people joined her hunger strike. She later said it was the strongest weapon left with which to continue our battle. Prison officials tried to put Alice in a psychopathic ward, trying to basically say that she was insane as a way to discredit her. And in order to kind of almost manifest that, they deprived her of sleep by putting an electric light in her face and turning it on, directly shining into her face once an hour. So she was being tortured.
This is insane.
Yeah. And she was continually threatened with being sent to St. Elizabeth's Hospital, which was like a notorious asylum in Washington, D.C. They referred to her as suffering a mania of persecution.
Sure.
But still, she refused to eat. In the last week of her 22-day hunger strike, again, she was force-fed, which basically involves, for those of you who are unaware, doctors basically forcing a tube into her nose and down her throat and pouring liquids into her stomach that way 3 times a day for 3 weeks. Now, this gave women like lifelong health issues.
Yeah.
Because obviously that's not how you're supposed to nourish yourself.
Yeah.
Alice still refused to eat. One physician reported she has a spirit like Joan of Arc, and it is useless to try and change it. She will die, but she will not give up.
Wow, that's an amazing quote.
Now, November 15th, 1917 is now known as the Night of Terror at this workhouse prison where the suffragists were being held. Quote, under orders from W.H. Whittaker, superintendent of the Occoquan workhouse, as many as 40 guards with clubs went on a rampage, brutalizing 33 jailed suffragists. They beat Lucy Burns, our friend from London, chained her hands to the cell bars above her head and then left her there for the night. They hurled Dora Lewis into a dark cell, smashed her head against an iron bed, and knocked her out cold. Her cellmate, Alice Cossu, who believed Mrs. Lewis to be dead, suffered a heart attack. According to affidavits, other women were grabbed, dragged, beaten, choked, slammed, pinched, twisted, and kicked. Now, the newspapers get hold of this and the fact of the hunger strikes and the force feeding. And suddenly, public opinion changes. So suddenly there's like an upswelling of support for the suffragists and what these women are facing. And with, ever increasing public pressure, the government released them all on November 27th and 28th, 1917. And ultimately, the Washington, D.C. Court of Appeals overturned all of their convictions.
Okay, I wasn't expecting that, but it shows the pressure of public opinion at that time, which actually surprises me.
And toward the end of 1917, Woodrow Wilson reverses his stance in order to support a suffrage amendment as, quote, a war measure. And over the coming months, Wilson met with Congress to gain the support of other elected officials towards a suffrage amendment.
Interesting.
What I love is that so basically the way an amendment works is that it has to be voted on by both the House and the Senate and approved by both the House and the Senate. And then it has to be sent out and approved in at least 38 of the 50 states.
Okay.
By the state government. And basically after like a big initial swell of support for the 19th Amendment, which gave women the right to vote ultimately, it ended up landing on Tennessee, which if I had been alive at the time, I would not have felt good about, because most of the elected officials did not support women's suffrage in the state of Tennessee. But the amendment that gave women the right to vote was ultimately decided by a vote cast by 24-year-old Harry Byrne, who had originally he was the youngest member of the Tennessee State Assembly at the time, and he had originally intended to vote no, but changed his mind after his mom sent him a telegram asking him to vote yes for women's suffrage. I don't know why. That makes me cry. Now, a lot of suffragists left the women's movement after the 19th Amendment because they're like, our battle has been won. Alice Paul is like, no.
That's unsurprising to me with what I've heard about this woman.
So she wants legally protected gender equality under the law. She then goes and gets herself 3 law degrees.
One simply isn't enough.
In order to, for those who are curious, an LLB, an LLM, and a DCL. I have no idea what those are. And she does this so that she can better understand how laws are drafted and passed. And with this knowledge, she writes the Equal Rights Amendment, or the ERA.
Amazing. So she wrote the piece of law.
Yeah. So the 19th Amendment that gave women the right to vote is actually the only mention of the word woman in the US Constitution.
Is it? That's quite wild, isn't it?
And the only right that is guaranteed by the 19th Amendment under federal law is the right to vote. And
apart from that, it's sort of like anything's kind of up for grabs because it's not in writing specifically. Interesting. Okay, so like it makes complete sense that Alice is like, this doesn't feel like a broad enough law.
Yeah, because life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness in the Constitution is only guaranteed to men.
Yeah, so no liberty or happiness for us. Okay, cool. So Alice is going to pop off about this, right?
Alice is going to pop off. Now, around this time, as a celebration of the 19th Amendment, on February 15th, 1921, which was Susan B. Anthony's birthday, she kind of, remember, initially was one of the starters of the movement in 1848, but who did not live to be able to vote herself. Alice Paul and the National Women's Party, which is her organization, commissioned a statue to be placed in the rotunda of the Capitol depicting Lucretia Mott, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and Susan B. Anthony. And there's an unfinished portion in the back representing the women leaders to come. It stayed in the rotunda for 2 days until it was relegated to the crypt of the Capitol.
Sure.
To this day, it's the only national monument to the women's movement. 75 years later, in 1997, a congressional resolution and $75,000 raised by the National Museum of Women's History moved the statue of the suffrage leaders back into the rotunda in the US Capitol.
Okay, thank God. I'm really glad that happened, because I was like, that's actually just like incredibly sad and frustrating.
It is crazy that it's the only national monument to the women's movement.
And that is mad, because now, I've mentioned this before on this podcast, American monuments are so good.
They're so good.
You guys are amazing at monuments. Like, there's so much thought. There's always like, it's always like kind of like multimedia. Like, there's usually like some water, like statues. Like, you go in for it. It seems crazy that you haven't done one for the gals.
Well, only done one.
Only done one.
When it was commissioned by Alice Paul herself.
Exactly, yeah. And then removed after 2 days.
Yeah. So Alice Paul introduces the Equal Rights Amendment at Seneca Falls in 1923 in a nod to 1848. And she says, if we keep on this way, they will be celebrating the 150th anniversary of the 1848 convention without being much further advanced in equal rights than we are. If we had not concentrated on the federal amendment, we should be working today for suffrage. We shall not be safe until the principle of equal rights is written into the framework of our government. The ERA has very simple wording. It states men and women shall have equal rights throughout the United States and every place subject to its jurisdiction. In 1943, Alice Paul proposed a new amendment with kind of similar verbiage to the 14th Amendment. She kind of rewrote her own work, saying equality of rights under the law shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or any state on account of sex. So that's the wording. Now, the ERA was introduced in every session of Congress. It was introduced originally in 1923, but it was introduced in every session of Congress from 1943. In 1972, it finally passed the House with 93.4% of the majority, and it passed the Senate with 91.3%.
That same year?
That same year.
Okay.
Alice Paul is quoted in 1972, because of course she was still alive, by saying, I never doubted that equal rights was the right direction. Most reforms, most problems are complicated. But to me, there is nothing complicated about ordinary equality. Now, unlike what Ainsley seemed to be saying about, she was like, I'm concerned about there being more laws. I don't want to be there to be more laws. The ERA does not add any new laws to the US Constitution. It only guarantees the rights currently within it to women.
Right.
So issues like abortion and same-sex marriage and unisex bathrooms and a female draft, which come up a lot with the ERA, which we'll get to, they don't officially become law upon the passage of the ERA. And in many ways, the ERA can be seen as an amendment for both men and women, because issues of like custody and employment and fair wages are important to all genders.
Yeah, yeah.
Now, in the meantime, as we're kind of working towards the passage in the Senate and the House, Alice is broadening the National Women's Party to have an international focus and founded the World Women's Party in 1938, later renamed the World Women's Party for Equal Rights, which was headquartered in Geneva, where she lived for quite a while and worked really closely with the League of Nations, which famously later became the United Nations, especially between 1938 and 1953, trying to further the rights of women around the world. And it was her organization, the World Women's Party, that's responsible for establishing the UN Commission on the Status of Women in 1946.
What? Why don't we? I just don't understand how I don't know this woman's name.
I know. I also was like educated, my secondary education in the States, and I'd never heard of her.
Yeah.
Also, when World War II broke out, the WWP headquarters were like a refuge for people escaping the Nazis. And the WWP and Alice personally helped people get American sponsors, and get passports to travel to the US to escape the Nazis. And she stayed in Geneva until the spring of 1941 when Nazi restrictions were imposed and she had to relocate the headquarters to DC. She's also quoted as saying that if women had helped end the First World War, the second one would not have been necessary.
When you're like, I bet she really ruffled some feathers when she said that.
Mm-hmm.
She really riled some people up.
So, as I mentioned, an amendment needs to pass the House and the Senate, but then it also needs to be taken back to the states before it can be ratified. Now, it was sent back to the states originally when it passed in 1972 with a 7-year deadline for the states to approve it. Mm-hmm. That was extended to 1982, but still only 35 states had ratified it. Okay. And you need 38. Mm-hmm. Now, people who fought for the ERA include Gloria Steinem, famously, Jane Fonda. By 1970, Presidents Eisenhower, Kennedy, Lyndon Johnson, and Nixon were all on the record as having endorsed the ERA. But unfortunately, a woman named Phyllis Schlafly ends up getting involved. She's a lawyer and activist, and she led a conservative grassroots movement that ultimately led to the ERA's defeat. And it fell 3 states short of ever being approved by the necessary number of states to go into the Constitution. And she basically led a grassroots movement by tapping into churches, both Catholic and evangelical, Mormon and conservative Jewish communities, convincing them that the ERA would lead to a moral decline of society. And she said, what I'm defending is the real rights of women. A woman should have the right to be in the home as a wife and mother.
There is an absolutely phenomenal mini-series. I mean, I think I watched it during lockdown, so maybe it was like 2019, 2020. It's called Mrs. America, and it follows Phyllis Schlafly in her like conservative activism. And Phyllis is played by Cate Blanchett. And it's amazing. It's a really good series. I'd really recommend it. Also, Rose Byrne is in it and is absolutely phenomenal. She plays Gloria Steinem, and it's like, I've only ever really seen Rose Byrne play like comedic roles, and she's just like absolutely kills it. It's got an amazing cast. Would recommend. It will probably be available to stream places.
She's also quoted in a 1972 speech, and which she later published in her own newsletter, saying, "Suddenly everywhere we are afflicted with aggressive females on television talk shows yapping about how mistreated American women are, suggesting that marriage has put us in some kind of slavery, that housework is menial and degrading, and perish the thought that women are discriminated against." She wrote that basically if the ERA passed, women would be forced to go to war by being drafted, that they would lose their right to child support and alimony, and society would fall apart. She said, "The women's libbers are radicals who are waging a total assault on the family, on marriage, and on children." Yeah, it was intense. She kind of demanded equal airtime to rebut the ERA. She basically said that she and her followers represented a silent majority. And it was all about kind of appearing feminine rather than feminist. They picked pink as their trademark color, and they aggressively distributed their literature. They charmed legislators with baked goods and kind of pleaded, these men to maintain the status quo, in the words of High School Musical. So basically, this woman single-handedly turned the ERA from like a kind of popular done deal into a culture war.
It's absolutely fascinating.
Yeah. Now, I will say Alice Paul, at the age of 79, did lead a successful campaign to add a sexual discrimination clause to the 1964 Civil Rights Act, which is incredible that she was like still going.
Yeah.
I will also say Alice never married. When she returned to the US in 1941, she first lived with her sister Helen, and then with her closest friend, fellow activist Elsie Hill.
Oh.
And after Elsie died in the 60s, she lived alone in reduced circumstances in a Connecticut nursing home. Now, are you ready to cry again, Fee?
No.
But she was still in her 80s protesting the Vietnam War and showing up at like women's rights protests. And then, even though she was like really struggling financially at this point in a nursing home all alone, Alice Muller, whose family had stayed at the Swiss WWP headquarters through Alice's help, found out that she was there and alone in Connecticut and had her moved to the Greenleaf Extension Home in New Jersey, where she lived until she died in 1977 when she was 92 years old.
So she was taken care of by people that she'd taken care of.
Yeah.
That's so lovely.
Yeah. Now, the main kind of objections to the ERA, as we've kind of stated, were basically that women would lose what this Phyllis woman saw as privileges, like being exempted from kind of compulsory military service, and economic support from husbands to care for children if the ERA was enacted. But ultimately, that is like perpetuating a state of dependence on men. Now, in the 1990s, there was like a swell yet again of support for the ERA. And there has been some recent momentum. Nevada ratified the ERA in 2017. Illinois ratified in 2018. And Virginia ratified in 2020, bringing it up to the required 38 states. But obviously, the deadline that was set by Congress for it to be ratified by the states had passed in like 1982. Now, the U.S. House of Representatives passed legislation like a few days after Virginia ratified the final and 38th state to remove the time limit that was placed on the original legislation. But the U.S. Senate still hasn't, even though that happened in 2020, the U.S. Senate still hasn't even brought that sister bill to a vote.
Okay.
And there is a debate about whether it's legal for states to ratify after the deadline. And also some states want to rescind their ratification of the bill decades later.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Kind of thought that was coming.
Yeah. I mean, that's kind of where we've landed today. It's still a very much debated topic. The Catholic Church opposes the ERA, saying that it is a threat to religious freedom and the pro-life movement. Mississippi Attorney General Lynn Fitch, who's known as the woman who overturned Roe versus Wade, has been quoted as saying, as the National Archives have said, there is no claim, there is no opportunity, and we just see this as continuing to pander to the radical, far-reaching left agenda. On the 17th of January, 2025, Joe Biden released a statement saying, I have supported the Equal Rights Amendment for more than 50 years, and I have long been clear that no one should be discriminated against based on their sex. We as a nation must affirm and protect women's full equality once and for all. And yet, the National Archives has said that the amendment cannot be certified because it wasn't ratified before a deadline set by Congress. And that is where we are at today.
Yeah. And I feel like in light of the kind of general attitude of the current political leader of the United States, I do not feel like in the next 4 years we're going to see this being pushed in a positive way.
Yeah. Now, like I will say, so the equalrightsamendment.org does set forth an argument as to the title of the document is Why the ERA is Duly Ratified as the 28th Amendment to the United States Constitution Executive Summary on January 4th, 2025. And they make some really excellent points about the National Archives don't actually have the right to make a judgment call. And actually, they have a purely ministerial role.
Yeah.
And that therefore, the fact that it has been ratified by 38 states means that it is the law of the land. And Biden has come out as saying that the ERA is the law of the land. It just hasn't been officially added to the Constitution yet. But that is a present day, like, big debate that is currently happening in 2025.
I mean, it's insane that we started so long ago with Alice writing this.
In 1923, literally over 100 years ago. But
it feels like it will be interesting to see if the next 12 months bears any fruit on this.
I mean, yeah, it'll be interesting to see where this story goes from here. But I would just like to pour one out for Alice Paul, suffragist, field hockey player, all-round icon. And I am going to say, I'm claiming her for the team.
I think we should welcome her with open arms.
I think generally speaking, when someone lives for decades with their close personal friend and never marries, I'm just going to say it's a queer vibe. Okay? It's a queer vibe.
Yeah.
I'm going to say she's a queer gal.
She's a queer gal, and we love her here at Queer Gals Watch.
I would go so far as to say I would give my firstborn, regardless of gender, at least a middle name Alice.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna, as much as we love Ainsley, I'm sorry, I'm not siding with you on this one, because the biggest thing that she's saying is, I don't want my rights handed down to me by a bunch of old white men. You're not. This bill was written by a gal.
Yeah, by women. And I think I love Ainsley's argument. I think she lays it out very well. I think she expresses herself very respectfully, but I also respectfully disagree.
Yeah, and I hope that Gloria Steinem took her to town.
I'm sure she did. Fictionally, I'm sure she did.
Right. Well, this has been the longest ever episode yet of Queer Gals Watch the West Wing, but it turns out I have a lot to say about the Equal Rights Amendment.
I've had a great time. Really fantastic ep and brilliant study session. I'm fired up, Leigh. I'm fired up for episode 18.
This has been Queer Gals Watch the West Wing. I'm excited for a Bad Moon Rising next week, Fee.
Mm-hmm.
We are Queer Gals Watch wherever you get your socials, except for X, because we've taken a political stance. And please do check out our Patreon and our Discord if you feel so inclined. It really does help us be able to make the podcast. The people are supporting us on there. But if that is kind of not a financial possibility for you for whatever reason, what's also really helpful is like leaving a little review, telling a friend, making maybe a little social media post about the fact that you have maybe been enjoying this podcast. All of those things are also super helpful.
Yes. And we will be back in your ears this time next week. When we do this all over again, Leigh, shall we?
Let's do it.
Okay. I'll see you then, my love. Bye-bye
See you
now.
then.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.